Somewhere in the book of Proverbs is a financial system 3,000 years old, and for approximately $7, you can activate it today in a way that Wall Street spent decades ensuring you would never hear about. I have spent over 2 decades studying the practical theology of biblical wisdom literature, not from a pulpit, not from a seminary classroom, from the text itself in its original historical and economic context, pattern by pattern, principle by principle. And what I found embedded across both testaments is not inspirational language about abundance. It is an operational infrastructure, a specific structured asset-backed savings system that ancient covenant communities used to defeat the exact economic force destroying your purchasing power right now. Most pastors will not say this from the stage, but the text says it plainly. And what I am about to show you will make you deeply uncomfortable, not because the system is complicated, because it is simple. And because the reason you have never implemented it is not ignorance, it is a theological distortion that was placed in your way deliberately. Here is what you need to hold before we go further. There are two financial crises running simultaneously in the life of the average Christian. The one they can see, inflation, debt, stagnant income, savings that purchase less every year, and the one they cannot see, a theological ceiling installed over generations that prevents them from ever building a system capable of surviving what the visible crisis creates. Both crises are addressed in the text. Neither one has been addressed from most pulpits. That changes in the next 15 minutes. Number one, the problem nobody names. Every dollar sitting in a traditional savings account right now is losing value, not metaphorically, measurably. In 2022, the purchasing power of the United States dollar declined at a rate that outpaced every standard savings vehicle available to the average household. The money did not disappear. It transferred. It moved from the accounts of people who held paper to the balance sheets of institutions that held real assets, real estate, commodities, productive equity. That is not a conspiracy. That is the documented mechanical function of inflationary monetary policy. Here is what the early church understood about this, that the modern church is almost entirely forgotten. Inflation is not a modern invention. The Roman denarius lost the majority of its silver content between the 1st and 4th centuries. Historians estimate somewhere between 90 and 98%, depending on the period and the emperor. The communities that survived that debasement were not the ones who held more denarii. They were the ones who held real goods: grain, oil, land, productive assets with intrinsic value that no emperor's edict could erase. And the early church did not merely observe this. They built an alternative, a structured, community-based economic infrastructure rooted in a model that predates Rome by nearly 2,000 years. But almost nobody in the modern financial conversation identifies what that model actually was, where it originated, or why it worked. Those are the three questions that change everything. Hold them. Number two, the ancient storehouse system and what it actually was. Genesis chapter 41. Pharaoh has two dreams. Joseph interprets them: 7 years of abundance are coming, followed by 7 years of catastrophic scarcity. What does Joseph build? Not a savings account, not a treasury of currency, a storehouse. A physical infrastructure for holding real assets, grain, the primary store of productive value in the ancient Near Eastern economy, accumulated during abundance and held in reserve for distribution during scarcity. Genesis 41:48 says this: Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. This is not charity. This is an asset-backed reserve system. Joseph does not store promises. He does not store receipts for grain. He stores grain, real tangible inflation-resistant value in physical form, held in distributed community nodes, managed with governance accountability, and released according to a predetermined covenant model. Proverbs 21:20 says this: the wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down. That is Solomon, the wealthiest individual in recorded ancient history, describing the single behavioral distinction between those who build durable wealth and those who do not. The fool converts every asset into immediate consumption. The wise person accumulates real goods before consuming. Storage precedes strategy. The storehouse precedes the surplus. The early church codified this. The first fruits tithe collected in early Christian communities was not purely a spiritual act, it was a storehouse contribution. Communities pooled physical goods, maintained a common reserve, and distributed from that reserve during illness, displacement, and economic disruption. The value never evaporated because it was never held in currency. It was held in real assets with intrinsic durable worth. That system did not disappear because it failed. Something ended it. And what ended it is the question you cannot avoid now. Number 3, how the modern financial system buried it. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 restructured the architecture of American finance. The FDIC frameworks of the 1930s followed. SEC compliance structures expanded throughout the mid-20th century. Within each of those legislative frameworks, a consistent pattern emerged. Community-based, asset-backed cooperative saving systems, mutual aid societies, church-operated community funds, credit cooperatives face compliance burdens, regulatory classifications, and tax structures that made operating them at small scale legally and financially unviable. Mutual aid societies in the United States numbered in the thousands at the turn of the 20th century. By 1960, the majority had dissolved, merged into commercial institutions, or been absorbed by government welfare frameworks. The church-based community fund model that had functioned as a practical economic safety net for Christian communities for centuries was reclassified, regulated, and dissolved. The system was not lost. It was legislated away. The infrastructure of community-based real asset accumulation, the practical operational storehouse, was replaced by a centralized paper currency savings model that benefits the institutions holding your deposits, not the communities making them. Here's what that means for you. The reason the storehouse model feels archaic, impractical, or spiritually symbolic rather than operationally real is not because it stopped working. It is because you were handed a replacement and told it was an upgrade. It was not an upgrade, it was a substitution that transferred the yield from your savings to someone else's balance sheet. But if the system was suppressed by law and institutional complexity, what does a legal, functional, modern version of it actually cost? That is the question the $7 answers. Right now, before we reach the activation sequence, type the word story hose in the comments. One word. It tells me and you that you are no longer treating this as a spiritual concept. Number 4, the modern storehouse and what the $7 actually is. The storehouse principle has 3 functional layers. Joseph's system had all 3. The early church model had all 3. And a modern reconstruction of that system, built within current legal frameworks, can be established for approximately $7 per month to begin. The first layer is the real asset layer. In the ancient storehouse, this was grain and olive oil. In a modern context, this is fractional ownership of precious metals, silver and gold. Held outside the paper currency system, several platforms currently allow fractional precious metal accumulation beginning at $3 to $5 per month. This is not investment speculation. This is the storehouse's first function. Hold real value that no central bank policy can debase. The second layer is the surplus layer, and of Genesis 41 records, Joseph storing a portion of every harvest during the years of abundance. That covenant stewardship model is built on principle, not a fixed percentage. And the principle is what activates the system. Automating even $1 to $2 per week into a separate account designated for community and crisis deployment mirrors the storehouse's second function. Accumulate surplus before need arises, not in response to it. The third layer is the accountability layer, and Joseph did not operate the storehouse alone. He operated within a governance structure, distributed city-level management, community access protocols. The modern equivalent is a biblical stewardship circle, a small group of covenant-accountable believers who hold each other to the storehouse disciplines. This costs nothing, but without it, the first two layers collapse into private accumulation with no community covenant dimension, which is not the storehouse model. That is just saving. The total cost to begin all three layers is approximately $7 per month, not $7,000. A system is not expensive. It was designed to be accessible to every household in the covenant community. That was always the point. But there is a reason most Christians who hear this will not implement it, and it has nothing to do with the $7. Number 5, the theology they distorted on purpose. This is the section most financial teachers skip entirely because it requires naming something the financial industry benefits from leaving unnamed. There are two dominant theological frameworks about money operating simultaneously inside the modern church. The first says that wealth is a sign of God's favor, that naming, claiming, and expecting financial blessing is the posture of faith. The second says that poverty is proximate to holiness, that wealth is spiritually suspect, that the comfortable Christian is a compromised Christian, that simplicity is virtue and accumulation is vanity. Both frameworks produce the same financial outcome, passivity. The first removes the obligation to build. If God will provide supernaturally, the storehouse is unnecessary. Faith makes infrastructure irrelevant. The second removes the permission to build. If wealth is spiritually dangerous, the storehouse is a temptation. Discipline looks like disobedience. In both frameworks, the Christian never builds anything, and the financial system that replaced the storehouse continues to hold their deposits, lend their money at interest, and harvest the yield their passivity generates. That is not a coincidence. That is a consequence. Proverbs 21:20 does not say the wise person prays for grain. It says the wise person stores it. Matthew 25:26 through 27 says this, "You wicked, lazy servant, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest." The master in that parable is not condemning the servant for being poor. He is condemning him for being inactive, for holding capital without deploying it into productive return. Deuteronomy 28:8 says this, "The Lord will send a blessing on your barns and on everything you put your hand to." A blessing on your barns, on the infrastructure you build, on the physical operational storehouse you construct in obedience to the covenant model. The theological distortion that neutralizes Christians financially does not come from one extreme. It comes from both, and the text dismantles both with the same instrument, the storehouse. The storehouse is the Bible's answer to passive faith and passive poverty simultaneously. It requires action, it requires discipline, it requires covenant accountability. It is the precise middle path between name it, claim it, magical thinking, and bless are the broke passivity doctrine. Remove that distortion, and you find yourself standing in front of a $7 decision that most of your financial peer group will never make. Not because it is expensive, because the theology that should have led them here was replaced with something that kept them elsewhere. Number 6, the activation. Joseph did not predict the future. He prepared for it with a system. That distinction is the entire lesson. Here is the sequence. Begin this week with the real asset layer. $3 to $5 per month into fractional precious metals. Silver first, then gold as the amount allows. This is your grain. This is the value you are removing from the paper currency system and placing into an asset class that holds intrinsic worth, independent of monetary policy. You are not speculating, you are storing. Add the surplus layer within the first 30 days. $1 to $2 per week, automated into a designated account. Label it. The label matters. Joseph labeled every storehouse by city. The label is the governance mechanism. Call it what it is, a covenant reserve, not an emergency fund. A storehouse. Establish the accountability layer before the end of the first month. 3 to 5 people. A covenant commitment to the storehouse disciplines. Monthly review. Mutual accountability to the giving sequence. First fruits before expenses. And to the storage sequence. Surplus before consumption. This is not a financial accountability group in the secular sense. It is a biblical stewardship circle operating on the same governing principle as the city-level managers in Genesis 41. 3 layers, $7 to begin. 3,000 years of documented covenant precedent behind it. The book on your shelf is not decoration. It never was. It contains the most durable financial infrastructure ever designed, tested against empire collapse, currency debasement, famine, plague, and every economic disruption the ancient world produced. The communities that built storehouses survived what the communities that held currency did not. That $7 is not buying you a product. It is buying you back into a system that was working long before Wall Street existed and will be working long after it is gone. If someone in your life is watching inflation erode everything they have worked for, while the church offers them prayer and no practical framework, share this with them. That may be the word they have been waiting to hear.